Well, folks, good evening and welcome. Unfortunately, I will not be able to make the class tonight because I have a bar mitzvah that I have to go to of a friend's son. But I will give a brief synopsis of a class that I recently gave. Now, as everybody knows, the idea of the festival, the holiday of Shavuot that we just completed. Shavuot, it was just the holiday of Shavuot a couple of days ago, and that is the festival or the holiday, the Jewish holiday, which celebrates and commemorates the giving of the Torah. Prior to that, for 49 days before that, or 50 days before that, rather, the Jewish people had left Egypt. And then on the second day of their leaving Egypt, they were told to count 49 days. And on the 50th day, they would receive the Torah. So these 49 days and then the 50th day correspond to, it's brought down in various words, corresponds to the 50 gates of understanding, the 50 gates of understanding, or what is called in Hebrew Nun Sha'arei Bina, the 50 gates of Bina. Now, first of all, we have to understand what the 50 gates of Bina are and what we're supposed to do about them, and so on. Let's just say that a gate is a pathway, an entrance, which has restrictions upon it. You're not free to go to through the entrance unless you know the code, or unless you have the key, so to speak. And so too it is with the 50 gates of understanding. The purpose of the 50 gates of understanding is come to a very, very high level of conceptual grasp. And in fact, we see that Moses himself, Moshe Rabbeinu, did not actually reach that level of understanding until the day that he passed on. It says on the day that he passed on that he went up Har Nevo, which is explained as Har Shenun Bo, the mountain of Nevo, which is explained as the mountain Shenun, that the 50th gate was upon it. That is when he got the 50th gate of understanding, which is completely enmeshed with and how shall I say, and matches with God's wisdom. So the 50th gate is the ultimate wisdom of God. But it is a process. It's 49 levels through which one has to go through before being able to get to the 50th level. Now let's explain what the origin of these is and what is meant by it. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole class that I gave before, but just the synopsis. The idea of the 50 gates is, first of all, found, according to the Kabbalists. It's mentioned in the Zohar on numerous occasions. Those 50 gates correspond to the 50 times that the Exodus from Egypt is mentioned in the Torah. Now, the truth is that it is mentioned more times than 50. It's in fact mentioned, there's another, after we get to 50th gate, there's another 11 times, I think it is, that it's mentioned, that the Exodus is mentioned. But commentaries, this is brought in the Paradise, Shar Gimel, the third section, this first chapter. Right at the end of the first chapter, it explains that the additional times that the Exodus is mentioned is just to mention the occasion when that had happened, but not to necessarily give us a path how to actually reach that Exodus. So the concept that there are 50 times that the Exodus is mentioned means that there are 50 levels of Exodus. It's not just that one thing is mentioned 50 times, it's 50 different levels, 50 different words, different sentences describing the Exodus from Egypt. And the whole concept of Egypt is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, the word Mitzrayim, Egypt in Hebrew, is the same letters as the words Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means restrictions, limitations. So it's 50 degrees of exiting, of getting out of one's limitations. Those are the 50 gates of understanding. Until one comes to the understanding the way the Almighty has that understanding. In other words, the deep, deep, deep understanding of the ultimate truth of all things. So those are the 50 gates of understanding. Now, in order to get through, so we just explained, therefore, that the whole concept of going through a gate, going through one of these gates, is a sort of a liberation from a level of constriction, of inner constriction, of ourselves. I saw a cute question today that somebody asked. He said like this, would you be happy to get $50,000 if your biggest enemy was given $100,000? So somebody answered and said, why should I not want to get $150,000? In other words, our own biggest enemy is generally ourselves. So, in any event, our own biggest restriction are restrictions that we have on ourselves, whatever those restrictions are. Everybody has different restrictions, and therefore everybody's exodus is a personal exodus from Egypt, and it goes through 49 stages until one gets to the final stage of freedom, which is the 50th gate. And as we see, even Moses, as I mentioned before, went through this process. Even though he was already an enlightened person, he went through this process until he got to the final gate. And of course, his exodus was different from all of ours, that's for sure. In any event, that is one source of the 50 gates. The second source of the 50 gates is at the end of the book of Job. I think it starts in chapter 37 of the book of Job, if I'm not mistaken, 37, 38, 39. God asks Job 50 questions, 50 very probing questions that God asks Job. Where were you when I brought the rains? Let's see over here. He says like this. Do you know how God imposes upon the clouds and how he makes his rain cloud appear? Do you understand the spreading out of the clouds or the wonders of the one of perfect knowledge? Or why your clothes feel warm when the land is becalmed from the south? Whatever, the English is terrible, but the translation is terrible here, but I'm just reading a translation. But in any event, if you go through, you'll see that there are 50 questions over there. Now, the answers to these questions are the keys to the gates. And in order to answer these questions, needs a lot of meditation, a lot of study, a lot of thinking, and a lot of in a sense, a lot of hard work. A lot of hard work. And it's not necessarily so that there's only one answer to the question. There might be different answers to these questions according to who you are, according to you as an individual. So that's the second source of the 50 gates. The whole concept of asking questions, of dealing with hard questions, is in fact a very important part of endeavor in Kabbalah and in Judaism in general. If you have a look into the Talmud is many tomes of the Talmud are records. Most of them is records of disagreements and arguments, and then conclusions from those arguments, like legal arguments. That's basically what it is. The tomes of the Talmud are legal arguments. Why is there so much argument going on? Not only because 2 Jews, 3 opinions, as the usual saying goes, but because in order to be able to understand something, so you have to ask questions. Now, I know that there's certain religious groups where asking questions is exactly what you're not allowed to do. You have to take everything on faith. But that's a very top-down approach. The whole process of questioning is a bottom-up approach. And we teach it to our children from very young, from a very, very young age. In fact, the festival of Passover introduces this whole concept to little children, that the custom and the requirement is you teach your children to ask why. Haben shoel ma, the child asks why. Why is this night, the night of Passover, different from every other night? Why is it that we're eating matzah? Why is it that we're eating maror? Why are we leaning, etc., etc.? All these questions that the child is introduced to. And children of a very young age, as soon as they're able to speak, they're taught these questions. And that's the basis for asking more and more questions, because in order to be able to come to the truth, you have to be able to question. You have to be able to question your situation and realize that your situation can be changed. You can move from one level to the next. You're not stuck where you are. You have to move. It's an obligation to move. It's an obligation to go out of Egypt and to remember the exodus from Egypt every day. In fact, it's very well worthwhile to read the chapter discussing the whole concept of the exodus from Egypt in the work called Tanya, T-A-N-Y-A, or Likutei Amarim. Likutei Amarim Tanya, there's another name for it, chapter 47. Just look up on the internet, Tanya chapter 47. You can go to Chabad.org, look for Tanya chapter 47. And read that chapter. It's in English. There's some versions with explanations and so on. It's all very well worth reading, understanding what this whole concept of Exodus is all about, and what the purpose of it is in order to go out of ourselves, so to speak, and cleave to the one above, cleave to God, get to that 50th gate, that gate of complete cherut, freedom. So this whole concept of asking questions is vital. And that's why God presents, instead of presenting Job with the answers, he only presents him with the questions. Because it's from the questions that you can go, that you as an individual can start to move yourself from the level that you're on to a higher level, to the next level. It is the concept of, how shall I say it? It's the concept of being dissatisfied with where you are and wanting to be somewhere higher than you are. And therefore, in order to do that, you have to question where it is that you stand now and why you are only here and not there. This process is what is called in Kabbalah, milamata lamaila, from below to above. Usually everyone expects that the Torah is given, that the teachings are given from above to below, from the master to the student, from God to the people. And that is true, it is. But there also has to be correspondingly the movement of from below to above. And that's what the whole concept of the 49 and 50 gates of understanding is all about. The 50 gates of understanding are achieved from below to above. It's a process of freeing ourselves from constraints and restraints of our minds, the way we think about things, our mindsets, and moving through one level of understanding to the next until we get to the 50th level. And that's what questions come to teach us. Do not be satisfied with the answer that you have now. Question and go further. Rise through the levels of understanding, because you will never get to the ultimate goal if you're just happy with where you are. You have to have this feeling that where I am is not the ultimate goal. So that was basically the class that I gave, more or less in a nutshell. And I'm afraid it's going to have to suffice for tonight because I have to go. And see you next week, God willing.